You're listening to The Move with Jarrod and Michael Ray. Conversations exploring why healthcare real estate is moving from alternative to essential, and how smart capital is making the shift to one of the most overlooked asset classes today.
We spent our first conversation focused on borderline lamentation about, like, why are we not seen in, healthcare as this, asset class hiding in plain sight, which it is. But we promised to get more granular and to dig into some of the specifics behind, accessibility, the opportunities, the outcomes that we're generating, and things like that. So let's spend some time today kind of really digging into some of the foundation that you laid around the trend in migration away from inpatient care and inpatient delivery of healthcare services to an outpatient model, both for its efficiency and opportunity and all that sort of good stuff. And in our last conversation, you described, that inflection point, right, where the number of outpatient visits began to meet and then exceed the inpatient visits, and how that's occurred over the last 20-ish years, but more importantly is representative of a larger sort of structural shift, if you will, by the healthcare systems and then by those of us who are in the space of informing and delivering on the built environment. So want to make sure that our outcome today out of this conversation is that we provide a deeper understanding of both where those opportunities lie and how we get there. So what is driving this shift? What are the demand drivers that have pointed to this direction and taking us where we're headed?
I think consumers drive a lot of it. And so when we start to think about, probably have this experience where if you need to go see your primary care physician, and I don't know, where is your doctor?
That's an interesting story. And this is part of it. I had an absolute miserable experience. Uh-huh. When I moved to Colorado from Southern California.
Hey, welcome.
Yeah, I know, right? Leave my politics behind. I'm 4 years past that now. It was impossible to establish primary care. Mm-hmm. And it got to a point where the system, which shall remain nameless but never forgotten, the closest primary care group to my home was 30 miles away. Mm-hmm. And for someone who is, please don't laugh, reasonably healthy, notwithstanding the extra weight I carry and all that good stuff, to me, that was a non-starter.
Well, so
I went concierge.
Well, so you're unique, but you're not. I mean, right? Because
are we talking in general?
In general, yeah. But for many Americans, that when you start to look at primary care and you think about where you live to where you work, the data would suggest that you want to be within 15 minutes or so to get to, because you're using that service, you're relying on that general care more and more and more. So easy access is important.
And we're talking 15 minutes, not like Cleveland 15 minutes or LA 15 minutes that you're allegedly.
Right. And every market's different and unique.
Yeah.
Specialty care, people will drive and travel for longer periods of time, 45 minutes, and sometimes, throughout various states, depending on what the care is. So there's a part of this that's driven by the consumer, because now we have more choice. Where do we want to go receive care? Part of it's driven by preference of provider. Part of it's being driven by the healthcare system. And so let's focus on the healthcare system for a second. A lot of our work on the development side is driven by the healthcare system and the hospitals. And so I can think of an opportunity that we're involved in. It's two large ambulatory outpatient medical buildings. And this particular system we were working with had its acute care, meaning hospitals, in place in this market. I think they had 8 to 10 hospitals at the time.
Okay.
What was lacking, though, was the ambulatory hubs. And why is that important? Again, as consumers, we want access, easy access. If you have a choice and you don't have to navigate a hospital environment, again, hospitals serve a very important purpose. But what we're talking about is you and I going to an ambulatory place that wants to be a place that's easily accessible, easy to park, friendly environment, and a place where the providers are. And I think when you start to look at some of the data, I want to say like 60% of, for example, outpatient surgeries now are being done in those type of facilities, not so much the hospital.
So are these not one size fits all, but it's interesting because you previously made a reference to the retailization. We were talking about it in the context of senior living at the time.
Right.
But, when retailers are assessing where they locate.
Yeah.
In a very sort of, retail oriented or consumerist sort of mindset, not all retail outlets are created equal. Is the same true when determining what your mix is at a ambulatory? And if so, who makes that decision? How do you assess that?
Yeah. So let's, before we go to mix, let's talk about retail for a second. Okay. Something that's important about retail, I almost don't love this comment, location.
Right.
But it is true in healthcare as well, because I think seeing where a healthcare building is, understanding the brand, that's extremely important for healthcare systems or other healthcare providers. The real estate and the location of the real estate has become, I think, more important than ever because time's limited for people. You're making decisions. You drive by a building and, if you see the healthcare system brand, you say, that's a new building there. Wonder what's going on there. Maybe I should learn more about that. So just fundamental, I'll call it just real estate location matters is super important as we start to think about ambulatory care and outpatient services.
Okay.
We think of it and from a just perspective of, again, what's the strategy? So I think what's different and unique about medical real estate is that it's really not a speculative business. So if you think about multifamily or you think about office, some of those are built on a very speculative basis. Healthcare traditionally is not, because we're designing around a particular strategy and business operational model. So when you say, who determines that? I think the answer is it depends. What I was describing to you in the two buildings that we had done in the particular marketplace was really being driven by the healthcare system because they had a gap in their care delivery model. Because again, it's more efficient, more cost effective. It's where patients want to go. And in this case, the healthcare system was leasing 50 to 60% of the building on a long-term lease. This is an investment grade healthcare system. And it was a market, and this is a really deep conversation, maybe even for another time, where there's independent physician providers, entrepreneurial doctors and nurses that are running these practices. And so the strategy was, how do we integrate the best of the best? The core operations of the healthcare system, which included a lot of very high-end services from ambulatory surgery center, emergency department, comprehensive imaging, to even some specialty care around oncology. Then how do you integrate into these buildings the specialists and the primary care doctors in a way that works for everybody? It's complicated business. One of the things we were talking about earlier was, why aren't more investors doing this? I think trying to understand access points into this business and this industry is difficult, and it's a complicated business.
I would agree, but I think perhaps where some confusion lie is, your use of the term speculative. And the assertion that, healthcare real estate is not speculative development. But when I hear and the average bear hears, specifically one that is, inclined to allocate capital, that, your credit system is only 50 to 60% of the tenancy.
Yeah.
And then you supplement it in things like that.
Right. That's not speculative.
Okay.
In my mind.
Say more.
Okay. So I think this is important. I like to talk about, let's define terms. So I guess in the traditional sense, yes, you have a speculative.
We set terms
component.
and we define terms.
Yes, we do. And so when we start to the projects that I was referring to, and those buildings were driven by a healthcare sponsor with a very deliberate plan, not we find dirt, we build a medical building, and we hope to fill it. That is how I would define speculative, the hope to fill it without a strategy. If I was an investor in something like that, I'd be very concerned, because sometimes those buildings, and our experience seeing these around the country, they in many cases struggle to perform. Some do, of course, but we have found, at least in our model and our approach, really is around building a building and coming up with real estate solutions around a defined business plan and strategy. So that's the distinction around speculative versus non-speculative.
I love that.
So,
because sorry to interject, but that's a very telling point and a very fine distinction, because it is a thin line between hope to fill and the dynamic that you're speaking to. Because I know personally, when we're engaged with physician groups and individual physicians who we're seeking to curate as part of that process, one of the things that we try to not impose, but impart upon them in terms of, making themselves financeable, or as a financeable part of that business, is, what we need you to do, good sir, good doctor, is, bring your story.
yeah.
How is your practice? How is your role in this sort of community that we're curating sort of accretive, irrespective of whether, you've got an LOI signed or something like that. So to your point, like, I think that is really important for any listener to understand that important nuance as between hope to fill and intentional curation.
Well, and I think it's good investment, and it ends up ending up in a, I think, better real estate solution and better operational model. And if we go back to the beginning a little bit here and we talk about outpatient, what does that mean?
Right.
I think we can think of it in the context of, there is healthcare system or hospital sponsored projects that may be an anchor tenancy within that building with various service lines that come into that building. That may be on campus, it may be off campus, as a matter of fact. There are other, I would say, an outpatient environment could be on campus, off campus, where it's 100% leased by a healthcare system or hospital with a very deliberate business plan. The healthcare system may want to decant some of those outpatient services to a more modern facility. I say modern in the context of, not that design absolutely matters, but where the industry is going, and use that very valuable acute care space for those acute care services. So we see a lot of that. That's a different driver for a real estate solution. It's a different driver for an investor. And you can start to look at the risk reward in that type of investment. And then you also have what I would call a physician driven model, which can also include a healthcare system, or really be a standalone center of excellence. You see a lot of that in orthopedics.
Right.
In orthopedics, because of the service lines and the technology and the ability for the orthopedic surgeons to do procedures in these outpatient environments, you're seeing a lot of growth in that domain too. So it's exciting for me to be in the space. Of course, I think real estate's the best thing in the world for us to do, mirrored with this care model around these tailwinds that we have. That's where the opportunity is. So it is not a one size fits all model.
Right.
Right. And from a tenancy perspective, a location perspective, the driver perspective, but the fundamentals remain the same. You're talking about access.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about a way to locate facilities and do it in a more timely, cost-effective way with either very specialized service lines or comprehensive service lines or sole-focused service lines. There's lots of approaches to this, which actually makes it pretty fun and pretty exciting. And it's market dependent. So
yeah, and it is. But I think when you hear the sheer number of factors that go into consideration of, where you locate your site. What specialties do you sort of supplement the anchor tenancy? Does the system want a surgery center or what have you? There are a multitude of factors to consider, all of which are, in the abstract, non-essential skill sets of healthcare systems and things like that. Now, they have resources and they have in many cases internal teams that kind of help with that analysis and do that. But it sounds like, because I also know it to be true, an incredibly complex exercise. So how do you simplify it in a way in which can meet the system's objectives, meet the physician's objectives, but then not sort of, I'm going to use an investment term here, load the deal to the point that it isn't financially viable?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It sort of makes sense. Let me see if we're in sync on this. Physicians, care providers, hospitals, healthcare systems, they are taxed. They are looking to deliver care. They're looking to be financially solvent. They have significant capital needs.
And inherent limitations on their ability to generate revenue
100%
through reimbursement rates and the like. I think that's probably where I was going, because if you wear an investor hat, I hear this, and it's incredibly complex, and so the value creation is tremendous, but yet the return profile generally and historically associated with this asset class is, for lack of a better term, it skews towards the core to value side. It's pedestrian. So how do you reconcile all that? You have a tenancy that has these inherent limitations on their ability to pay rent. You're typically locked in.
Tenants pay rent.
No, they absolutely. But as you know, since the vast majority of these deals are competitively bid, they're subject to rental constants with caps on escalators and things like that. So you're working within a fairly constrained economic environment. Yeah. Where do we get the juice?
Well, I think it's a trade-off. If you want juice, you could go develop a 100% speculative product of some sort, right? And you could take the risk on something like that. If you're looking to get market-based good returns and have stability in your investment and invest in something, my own personal opinion, that matters. We talked about the personal needs and personal connection. Then healthcare real estate makes a lot of sense. The complexity and comprehensive nature of the business, it creates an opportunity for firms like ours and others to work with healthcare systems and providers. They get leverage from us. We have expertise in the space. We can de-risk the delivery of these assets for our tenants, our systems. We can let them focus on what they're best at, which is delivering care to their patient base. We de-risk for our investors, and we know what we're doing, right? And on what projects will be successful long-term. We're looking to be successful long-term, create investments that matter, that you can get really good returns, but it's also patient in many respects.
No.
And so this is not an investment class for everybody that's looking for a quick return or a flip of an asset. That's somewhat incongruent, really, with what healthcare systems and providers ultimately are looking for.
No, I would agree with that. And it's interesting because I think it is appealing to both that private capital base, but that's why in recent years it's lent itself to the scalability of the institutional capital base because of that very sort of value proposition that you describe. It's that opportunity to get access to those superior risk-adjusted returns that can then facilitate a very efficient, whether that be tax efficiencies or the ability to just sort of get a completely different return profile with respect to a long-term hold, and allow the power of that compounding equity to continue to grow.
100%. And when you think about that element, and you mentioned scale again, and we think about it from an investor perspective, many of these investment opportunities and like projects that we're involved in, they are a multitude of projects, not just one asset, because relationships matter. And when you deliver on your promises and commitments, you have more opportunity. And given the pressure that's going on with the healthcare systems today and the hospital systems around capital, there is a natural move towards third-party solutions. And that's where we come in. But those solutions have, again, the fundamentals of a proven track record, your ability to execute, platform, and a willingness to work with these people. And I think that's different in our business, in our industry, because the most successful projects that we've seen in investments have been one of collaboration. And what does that mean? Like, let's define terms again. If we're talking about a build-to-suit opportunity for a medical system or a hospital system, and we see a lot of these now because, again, of the capital constraints, they are looking to us to come up with the full solution and full capitalization of a project like this. And so the scale opportunities come from everything of help us fund our improvements, help us fund additional infrastructure on our campus, help us grow. That's where it becomes pretty exciting.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And I think what makes it even, I guess, more exciting is, to your point, that shift away from self-performance and a greater reliance on a third-party expertise and, frankly, third-party capital, because operationally and for lots of other reasons, systems need to leverage their balance sheet to do other things. From a capital planning and perspective, it's just an inefficient exercise. So that is in addition to kind of what you laid out in our last conversation, the inherent limitations around the physical plant, and not quite the same obsolescence dynamic that we see more prevalent in the senior space, but it's occurring in the medical space.
Right.
So speak to that. So clearly we have demand drivers just in terms of the growth in the population, the capital stress on the systems themselves that make it easier to involve and bring in third-party development. But as it relates to the constraints imposed by the existing built environment, whether it's the advances in technology or just the fact that it's just in a part of town that I ain't going to, or I move to the suburbs or exurbs and I'm beyond that 25 to 40 minute sort of drive time kind of thing. So like how's that changing?
So I think I think those are fundamental real estate questions that we're going back to again. If you look at the needs, those needs don't change, whether you're in a downtown Denver area or you're moving to the suburbs. And do you actually have the infrastructure there? Does a healthcare system actually want to come in and plant a flag? It's becoming a very, very competitive, aggressive business, which again goes back to choice and the retailization elements that we were talking about earlier. Because for me, for example, where I live in down south in Colorado here, I can choose university systems, I can choose private systems, secular, non-secular choices are abound, all within like 15 minutes. So everyone's competing for that same population base. So having an ability to come in, and when we think about the constraints, I think the constraints differ by market and marketplace. There could be physical constraints, geography, campus, et cetera. But I also think ultimately it comes back to what is the business case? What is the strategy of the particular system or healthcare provider that they're looking to execute on? Because there could be a gap in a market that they really want to get into, because they need to. They're losing patient volumes. Or there's just an unserved market that they see opportunity in. That happens frequently. Or it just comes down to an existing campus where somebody, a healthcare system, just needs help. We're not well staffed because we've had to cut because of our pressure that we're feeling. So we need to lean in to a third-party developer to really help with the execution of something like this.
Yeah.
I would also argue, even if there's a very sophisticated staff on team at a healthcare system, they can still get the benefit of working with third parties because we view the world differently. We view speed differently, quality, design, how to implement, how to recruit physicians, how to de-risk, how to optimize asset value. All of those benefits, by the way, go back to the investor too, because when these opportunities have been well conceived and thought out and executed on, if you take an on-campus asset like we have just down the street here, that is a wonderful investment after you've done the three-dimensional chess to pull off the physical real estate and deal with the constraint.
No, and so because the challenges that we get both from the systems and in many respects, the capital as well. To your point, those benefits of design and innovation and those things accrue back to the benefit of both.
Yep.
So, as compared to an asset class like retail, like multifamily, do we have an obsolescence concern here? Like in the context of design and those kinds of things, especially as we get it all.
You ever been in an old
the time.
hospital or old medical outpatient building, which you can't call a medical office building anymore?
Right.
Actually, if you think about that, you go into some of those old medical office buildings and there's a reason they're becoming obsolete. It's a natural course and evolution of what should happen to those assets.
So how are we?
Absolutely.
So what are we doing today to not necessarily future proof, but we know the impact of technologies like AI, which will inform and influence the delivery of healthcare services, the layout and the programming of these facilities as they sort of evolve to meet the sort of growing needs of the population as it too evolves. How are we different?
Yeah, so I think that's an ongoing opportunity and challenge that everybody faces in the industry, which is how do you create flexibility and fungibility in physical plant? So when you're looking at operational models, for example, we have a team here that focuses a lot on the strategy and the design elements of these outpatient models because things do change. Technology changes. Business and medical practices evolve in how they deliver care. And so you need to think through what does that look like and how does that transition or translate to the physical real estate? Because there's times, and we see this a lot, which is a healthcare system may come and say, I have this need for 150,000 square feet. And we dig in and say, we actually think you can get more efficiency and meet your entire business plan and reduce the building size by 20%. That's a win-win. You accomplish that by bringing the right-minded people together that can influence these different decisions from the care providers, from the developer investors, from the architects and from the contractors with a very deliberate approach and strategy in mind, which is things will change. We know things will change. It's inevitable.
So it is inevitable, but if I'm an investor and I have, $10 million to allocate to a real estate strategy.
Yep.
We're in an environment where multifamily is challenged with oversupply, inability to increase rents. You have municipalities continuing to be, are you anti-development? Are you pro-development? So there's lots of things to consider as you sort of survey the real estate landscape. And that investor is looking at it and saying, I'm choosing between a multifamily, industrial, or healthcare. What's your move?
I think the move is really clear in this case. One, I think it's being clear on what your ultimate investment thesis is. Second, it's market. Markets don't lie. And when you look at the opportunity set and your investment choices, medical and healthcare real estate is a growing market. That's your move. Get on board. What do you think the move is?
I'm right there with you. I think the inevitability of the increase in population, especially within the target demographic, the projected increase in personal expenditure on a per capita basis is just going to necessitate these innovative new approach to the built environment around the delivery of medical services. So to me, as someone who was taught, success is defined as putting yourself in front of the inevitable.
Right.
Well, it's a pretty straightforward move, and that's the one I would make.
Well, let's go put that $10 million to work then.
Next move, baby. Let's go.
That's a wrap.
Thanks for listening to The Move, a show exploring what's shaping the future of healthcare real estate. If you liked what you heard, follow the show and share with someone you know looking to make their next move.